To kickstart Session 1, Carbon Markets and Internal Carbon Pricing, it is our honor to have Mr. Zhang Jinbai, Executive Vice President of Towngas Smart Energy Company Limited, to deliver his keynote presentation. Mr. Zhang, please.
Thank you. Ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you for having me today. Because I have probably 15 minutes, so I will cut to the chase. Because today I will talk about more like my personal feelings regarding compliance market, voluntary market, and some opinions regarding Hong Kong carbon market. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to share some ideas regarding the EU ETS, the emission trading scheme, and also our national ETS. Well, a lot of people say that EU ETS till today is still the most successful carbon market in the world, which I do believe, because in terms of the trading volume, transaction volume, I think it counts for 3/4 of the whole international carbon market. And the transaction volume is more than, I think last year, it's more than 750 billion euros. And besides, you can see that there's a new ETS too. It's being created in order to incentivize the new sectors, including road transport, buildings, and also other industries which were not covered in the first ETS. And also don't forget CBM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which was, I think, became a European law on 17th May. And some may say, okay, it's carbon tax, but personally I don't think so, because I think it's a good complement of the existing ETS system to avoid carbon leakage. So all these favorable policies make the financial institutions and the investors, well, active and confident in carbon trading. And also, consider the EU allowances, the product, as a high-quality credit or high-quality product to against the climate change. And after all, if we see the result, is that from the 2005, the establishment of EU ETS until today, the whole emission under the coverage of EU ETS, the whole emission has reduced for nearly half, 15%, 50%. So that's I think that's the ultimate goal of each ETS. And on the other hand, for our national ETS, well, actually national ETS launched in 2021 using EU ETS as a reference. Some may say that, okay, because it covers 4.5 billion tons of emission, it might be the world's largest carbon market, which personally I don't think so, because in terms of the liquidity, in terms of the trading volume, I must say it's quite disappointing. Some may say it's catastrophic. Why? Because the trading volume until today is 200 million tons. That's equivalent to a 2 weeks trading volume in EU ETS. And in terms of the transaction is 1.4 billion euro, less than 0.2% of EU ETS in 2022. Of course, some may say that it's the beginning of the ETS, but considering we have 8 regional pilot carbon markets operational for more than 10 years, and the EU ETS was thoroughly studied even before the establishment of our Chinese national ETS. So it's still a little bit disappointing, but I hope it will improve soon. And in terms of the trading volume of national ETS, 200 million tons, you may know that a lot of tradings were done among different entities in the same group. So sometimes I see the result of trading, I say, okay, it's not really trading, it's just a balancing, internal balancing. So there are several measures needs to be taken soon in order that the price of carbon, the carbon price, needs to be determined by the market itself. And for example, the measures include inclusion of other 7 sectors except the thermal power plants. And you may heard that in 2022, we heard a lot about, our government will include cement or electrolytic aluminum producers into the system. But now we are in the middle of 2023. And probably they will be included by end of this year or maybe beginning of next year. And also, Chinese government said that the other 7 sectors will be included before 2025, like petrochemical, chemical, papermaking, aviation, non-ferrous metals, et cetera, But frankly speaking, we are behind schedule. So that's something we need to, accelerate. So that's the first point. And secondly, that, of course, annual reduction of the quota and the introduction of the auction system, that's quite obvious. And then is participation of the financial institution and investors, even individuals. In EU ETS, well, basically the financial institutions and investors, they are the main participants. And for example, here today I represent Towngas. We are not a compliant entity, but we have a lot of C&I customers, commercial industrial customers. They have a need, but we cannot trade. So that's something personally, I get a little bit worried. So some may say that because our government cannot allow financial institutions to be part of the game because they need to make sure the stability of the market and keep financial risks in check. But sometimes I say, okay, ensure market stability, maybe it's not the purpose of establishing an ETS. It's not the purpose. So a clear timetable is needed when we can be part of the game in order to boost the liquidity and find the real carbon price. And most importantly, that's the last point, is the legislation process. Because until today, we still rely on the administrative sanctions, for example, and at a ministry level, for example, fines of 20 or 30,000 RMB, or maybe cut off the future allowances. That doesn't really matter. That's why at the beginning of this year, during the National 2 sessions, a lot of proposals were put. For example, accelerating the establishment of law called, I don't remember the name, tackle climate change and promote carbon neutrality, or sometimes link the non-compliant entities into the national credit system or to the financial system to have an impact on their investment, on the fundraising, et cetera, So all in all, for now, until today, I don't think the national ETS, their purpose is fulfilled. Some may say in the mind of policymakers, they have other more serious issues like COVID impact or economy recovery. But personally, I think, boost carbon market may not jeopardize the economy recovery. And we just need a serious and clear timetable in order to be prepared. So that's all about compliance market, because I really don't like it. And let's talk more about the voluntary market, which is far more interesting. With various participants, different products in different regions. And sometimes you think, okay, you can use a carbon credit to offset your emission. And don't forget, you can also generate revenues from these trading activities. And also, the most important thing that these trading activities actually finance the real emission reduction projects. I think that means something. So that's why on 18th May, actually Towngas, we announced our carbon neutrality roadmap. And we firmly commit that we will achieve CO2 peak in 2029 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2045 for all our activities, all our business in mainland China. And how we do it. And we will achieve it following the CREO rules. For example, the C means calculating, because we set up a huge team, including our colleagues sitting there. And it took us almost a year to carry out very comprehensive carbon audit. And we did it for more than 200 subsidiaries of the Towngas Group. and over 100 cities. In the end, we figured out what's the kind of the emission, what's the volume of the emission for each of our entities. And then reducing, well, actually that's something we've been working on because it's quite complicated. It's not just simply to set up a year of your CO2 peak or carbon neutrality. It's a huge model with a lot of inputs, a lot of assumptions from all the documents we looked for, and with discussion with all these kind of experts. So it's a huge work. In the end, we need to decide for each entity when to do what. And basically, the measures are physical measures and virtual measures. For example, for physical, it means investments. So that's why Towngas invested heavily on renewable energy projects like rooftop PV, and also energy conservation installations, energy management, energy storage systems, all that. And in terms of virtual approach, for example, we have our power trading entity, and we have our carbon trading entity. And no matter which approach, it either reduce your energy consumption, and therefore carbon emission, of course, or replace the existing energy source with greener alternative. So that's reducing. And don't forget offset. Because sometimes you say, okay, I know how much of our emission, and I just buy some carbon credit to offset it. No, that's greenwash. Definitely don't do that. So in the end, only the inevitable emission occurs, and normally we use the carbon credit from the renewable energy projects we've been investing. For example, last year, Towngas, we invested and installed 1 gigawatt rooftop PV, and we decided to continue to do so until 2025 to achieve 8 gigawatt. So for this kind of investment and installation, we can contribute to the, basically we can contribute more than 120 million carbon credit or emission reduction from 2023, this year, until 2045, the commitment year of our carbon neutrality for mainland activity. So that's how we leverage voluntary market, and I think it's not only to offset our inevitable emission, because our emission is not big, it's quite a small portion, but most importantly, we need to invest all these renewable energy projects in order to contribute to the whole society. So that's our purpose. And also, in the end, some personal opinions regarding Hong Kong carbon market. Because some may say that, okay, it's clear that Hong Kong carbon market plays an important role to connect, the mainland carbon market and also overseas carbon markets. It's true. But maybe it's not a bad idea to, to create its own carbon products and its own system of auditing, certification, issuance, and trading. Because, for the voluntary market in China, the CCER scheme, the China Certified Emission Reduction, is not restarted yet. Even we may say, okay, it will restart end of this year or maybe beginning of next year, but there are a lot of products. We don't know which kind of products can be eligible, which are not. So in the end, there are probably a lot of real emission reduction products which will not be eligible in the CCR scheme, but they are real products who contribute to the society. So for this kind of products like rooftop PV products, like distributed wind, who supplies electricity directly to the customers, or like waste incineration products, all these kind of products. So could we consider that this product could be a source for qualification and to issue their carbon credit? But of course, during this process, a question needs to be paid attention is double counting, or even sometimes triple counting. Because we have a lot of C&I customers, and recently after the COVID, I discussed a lot with our customers, and they have the, the green pressure from the downstream or from their investors, and they say, okay, we want to buy some green certificates, or maybe buy some, CCER from the utility scale PV or wind farm, et cetera, but they got questioned because all this utility scale product, they sell the electricity to the grid and consumed by all the end users in mainland China. And that means they allocate their green right to all these end users. And recently, thanks to the power trading scheme in China, especially the green power trading scheme, the dedicated some specific PV or wind farm through the bilateral contract, or you can call it PPA, power purchase agreement, they allocate the green right or green certificates to dedicated end users. So for this part of environmental right, it's double counted. And even some products, they issued CCER before 2017, so it's triple counted. So normally when we tackle these issues with our customers, we need to, to exclude all the utility scale PV or wind who signed the bilateral contract in order that the environmental right of all these renewable energy products, they can be monetized once, not twice. But in terms of, for example, the rooftop PV products or the distributed wind product who supplies electricity physically directly to the customers, to the end users, so they don't sell electricity to the grid. So basically, there's physically no double counting issue. But you need to make sure that the environmental right in the contract, they belong to the investor of PV or wind or belongs to the end users. So for example, in Singapore Exchange, they started to do this kind of certification or insurance of the carbon credit from the rooftop PV products in mainland China, and the carbon credit is being traded at now. So I think the system, the product, well, except the role of linking mainland and overseas, I think maybe Hong Kong carbon market, we should have our own agenda. So that's all I'm going to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Please be seated. It is our honor to have Ms. Lydia Sheldrake, Director of Policy and Partnerships of Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, to give us a keynote speech today. Although Ms. Sheldrake cannot join us in person today, she has recorded a video to set the scene for today's discussion. Let's watch the video now.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you today. I'm Lydia Sheldrake, Policy and Partnerships at the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, the VCMI. Thanks for having me today, and thanks to the Business Environment Council for hosting this interesting discussion, and apologies to not be with you there in person. This is such an important agenda. VCMI was launched in the run-up to COP26 with support from the UK COP presidency, as well as United Nations Development Programme, Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and we have partnerships with various organizations, including, for example, with the We Mean Business Coalition, with Rinrock International. And we have a mission to enable and ensure that high integrity voluntary carbon markets deliver for the 1.5 degrees goal. And by that, we mean bring benefits to the atmosphere, people, and nature. We're delivering two key pieces to contribute to that. Number one, we're developing best practice rules for the demand side of voluntary carbon markets for corporate buyers of carbon credits. And we're also providing support for policymakers in host countries to help access voluntary carbon markets and channel finance to best support national climate prosperity. And so why is that important? Because we know that we need to act now if we are going to meet the 1.5 degrees goal. And voluntary carbon markets can deliver additional mitigation now by unlocking potentially significant revenue streams, which can be used to finance nature-based solutions, as well as innovative technologies, bring down the cost of capital and channel investment into low and middle income countries to support and accelerate clean growth and sustainable development. You can see on the graph on the right, the huge uptick in both the value and the size of voluntary carbon markets shown in the red and black lines, just showing the trajectory of growth and the potential to continue bringing value to the climate fight. But this growth will only continue if we can build the rules for integrity, end to end from supply to demand sides. Critical challenges must be overcome. The market is volatile, opaque, and has been criticized for cases of low quality credits, mis-selling and or misuse of carbon credits, On the demand side, there are confusing claims. Companies make climate claims without a common basis for understanding how carbon credits factor in, and that causes risks of either real or perceived greenwashing. The limited capacity, involvement, and support of host countries to create the enabling conditions for the private sector to engage. And across supply to demand sides, there's a general lack of transparency and trust, which is hindering action. The good news is that a lot is happening to build the rules and infrastructure to provide that integrity and provide that trust and unlock action. On the demand side, we at VCMI are developing a claims code of practice, which is best practice rules for the buyers of carbon credits. On the supply side, the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets are developing a threshold standard to ensure the quality of the carbon credits themselves. We work really closely and in complement with each other so that we can bring the pieces of the puzzle together for high integrity voluntary carbon markets. And we also seek to build on the other existing elements of voluntary carbon markets and corporate accountability frameworks so that we're building cohesion and complementarity within the market. There is great value for business in all of this to engage in high integrity voluntary carbon markets. Carbon credits play a key role in net zero transitions and can help demonstrate climate leadership. High integrity use of carbon credits can also help build resilience in value chains and show responsibility on climate, which is increasingly important for competitiveness and employee retention. And of course, high integrity use is important for reputational and legal risk mitigation, as we're seeing a rising tide of climate litigation focused on climate claims and carbon credits. So I'll give a brief overview of what we're doing at the VCMI to develop the Provisional Claims Code of Practice. The Provisional Code was published in June last year. It is a buy-side standard which sets out specific criteria for corporates and answers two key questions. Number one, when and how should companies make voluntary use of carbon credits? Number two, what claims can they credibly make about this use? And so by clarifying criteria to these key questions, use of the claims code can deliver transparency on trust on what good looks like so that companies that are going above and beyond get recognized and rewarded for doing so. The drafting of the Provisional Claims Code was based on extensive multi-stakeholder dialogue and input and is based on a series of key design principles, including that carbon credit use must be additional to policy and corporate decarbonisation. So the use of carbon credits must be in addition and not replace emissions reductions, which would otherwise happen today. It follows the mitigation hierarchy and rewards achievements, not just commitments, and incentivizes continuous improvement. The Provisional Code includes 4 steps to making a VCMI claim. Number one, a company meets the set of foundational criteria which demonstrate good corporate governance on climate. So that includes setting long and short-term emissions reductions targets, transparency in inventories, and aligning advocacy activities. Number two, a company identifies the claim they want to make, and VCMI provides a set of enterprise-wide criteria for claims, as well as a brand, product, and service level claim. Number three, the company purchases high-quality carbon credits to underpin the claim, and we set out a series of core criteria to determine quality, drawing on the ICBCM's work. And finally, the company must report transparently on all of the previous steps and have that verified by an independent, credible third party. The Provisional Code was released last summer, as I said, and we are now working on finalizing the claims code and the insurance model. We did a public consultation last year and a corporate road test, finding strong support for the claims code, although updates which were needed to make it operational. We had over 150 respondents to the public consultation, and around 70 companies road tested the guidance, including some of the biggest companies in the world, from Unilever to Hitachi, for example, and also various small and medium-sized enterprises covering different geographies and sectors. The key issues which we identified include, number one, balancing ambition and accessibility, so that the claims code provides a high aspiration bar and a pathway to meet that bar. Number two, implementation and operability of the guidance, so plugging gaps and clarifying criteria so that the guidance is fully operable and assurable. Number three is on treatment of scope 3 emissions. So the difficulty of measuring, reporting, and setting targets for scope 3 is something which we have been addressing with key partners. Number four was on the design and the clarity of the headline claims names themselves. And number five was on the need for further carbon credit guidance. So what's next this year? As I said, we are working on integrating the feedback and to finalize the claims code of practice, mobilize corporate uptake. And we are pulling together two key groups to continue to provide consultative input and a sort of market sounding board into our work. And that's the VCMI Stakeholder Forum, for which there is an expression of interest live on our website now. So please take a look at that, take a look at our website if you are interested to find out more and potentially submit an application to participate in the Stakeholder Forum. And we're also looking to bring together early adopters of the claims code. So this will be corporates who will be seeking to implement the code and make VCMI claims. In addition to the claims code, we are also looking to drive collaboration in the voluntary carbon markets ecosystem, given that there is so much going on and so many initiatives, so many actors operating in this space. We need to bring the pieces of the puzzle together and give clarity on how the pieces work. So some key milestones for us this year. On the 28th of June, we will launch the VCMI Claims Code of Practice, the Claims Code, and also announce the VCMI Stakeholder Forum. In November, we will publish an additional package of modules, which will increase the operability and the accessibility of the claims code. So these will not change the core elements released in June, but continue to elaborate the claims code so it becomes an increasingly sophisticated and tailored product, which provides for other routes, for example, for small and medium-sized enterprises. It is also worth highlighting that this month, on the 11th of May, we launched the VCM Access Strategy Toolkit, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So suffice to say, 2023 is a big year, and we have high integrity voluntary carbon markets in view. As well as all of the pieces we're doing, we know there is critical work being progressed by the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets and SBTI, and we're certainly going to see all of this coming together and action ramping up based on the high integrity rules by COP28 and in advance of that too. So just to outline on this other key piece, which we've been working on, the VCM Access Strategy Toolkit. This is guidance to help countries maximize the benefits of carbon finance. And this tool is developed for policymakers to provide policy relevant considerations covering if and when to engage with voluntary carbon markets, the financing for countries' nationally determined contributions, carbon markets and NDC achievement, the legal and institutional frameworks needed to underpin high integrity carbon markets, and ensuring high integrity in carbon markets. So this is very much a holistic, practical tool for policymakers to unlock voluntary carbon markets finance in the round and in complement to other streams of carbon finance, including compliance, carbon markets, and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So with that, I say thank you. I hope you come with us on this journey. Please do sign up to our newsletter on our website. Our website address is there on the slide, www.vcmintegrity.org. And please get in touch with me and my colleague, Rafaela, if you'd like to discuss any of these elements further. We would be delighted to hear from you. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your conference.
I hope you have enjoyed Ms. Sheldrake's video. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I would like to remind our online participants to use our Q&A box if you have any questions to the panelists. For our audience in the room, you may just raise your hands and we will pass you the mic. Now, may I invite our moderator of this session, Professor Grace Hurd, Adjunct Professor, Division of Environment and Sustainability of HKUST, and our panelists, Mr. Zhang Jinbai, Mr. Mark Harper, Mr. Hendrik Rosenthal, Mr. Raymond Fong, and Ms. Lucita Ng on stage for the panel discussion.
Good morning, everyone. This is going to be a 40 minutes panel. I will save some questions for Q&A, both physical attendees as well as those online. I've been given an iPad here. So without further ado, I think we have a lot to talk about. Can you just put your hand up for the physical attendees? How many of you are familiar with carbon credits and carbon markets? None? No. Okay, there are quite a few. Okay, so this is, as you can appreciate, a very nascent topic. And do not worry if you don't know enough, because there's time to learn and time for you to start understanding the different types of carbon credits. And who do I have better to explain that than Hendrik from CLP? One of the two power entities in Hong Kong. They're not only an issuer of renewable energy certificates, what we call REG, but also they are a buyer. And so to start off, carbon offsets, carbon credits, renewable energy certificates, all these acronyms, people are getting really confused. So I'm going to start with you, Hendrik. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much for having CLP join this panel today. And I don't think I could do much better than what Jinbai actually did earlier, as well as Lydia, in terms of explaining some of the details around this, but perhaps just taking a step back from that, because there is a fair degree of complexity here in terms of maybe just by illustration what we do in this market. And yes, as a issuer of credits, as a seller of credits, as well as perhaps being a buyer of credits. There is a difference between renewable energy certificates and carbon credits. They are an entirely different unit. Carbon credits are based on tons of CO2. Renewable energy certificates are based on electricity, kilowatt hours, units of electricity. We have legacy credits, I would like to call them. Legacy carbon credits from our business in India in our portfolio. Those were issued, some of them more than 10 years ago, under the Clean Development Mechanism. And in those days, the idea was that we need an additional financial incentive for companies to build renewable energy facilities. A wind farm, that's where most of our credits come from. It's an additional subsidy, if I may use that term carefully, to support for these projects to get off the ground. Now, if you look at credits, these are then now called avoidance credits. We are avoiding emissions by not utilizing an alternate, higher in carbon-intensive fuels, such as coal, for example. So then you calculate that avoided emissions based on a comparable, what's common in that market. And that's how you then bank that credit, and that's how you come to the term carbon credit. That was 10, 15 years ago. The market has changed. Renewable projects, wind, solar, the financial component of that, getting that off the ground, has become, let's just simplify, cheaper, right? It is just not as expensive as it used to be to build these. So the additional component, that additional financing you might need to get these off the ground may not be justified, right? So the additionality is lacking. And that's a core carbon principle from the Integrity Council, as well as what VCMI will be adopting for how companies perhaps should be utilizing credits. Okay, so let me park that. And now, what we have in Hong Kong is renewable energy certificates. And those are issued so that a buyer can make a claim, an environmental attribute claim, and a claim that the electricity that they buy has a zero carbon content. And those we issue on the basis of our feed-in tariff, actually, on the basis of the projects that we support in Hong Kong for individuals to be putting solar panels on rooftops and generating electricity from that, and we package that as certificates. There's equivalent certificates globally available in various markets, including in China. And I think that's what you were referring to in terms of double counting. So a wind farm may generate a CCER, or used to, some 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever they stopped. And then now they also issue a green electricity certificate, and they may have an off-taker. This is all doable. It's all legal. That's the problem. Not that we would do that with our assets. You should only be selling your environmental attribute once. That's really the bottom line. And there needs to be integrity in this space, and it needs to be traceable. It needs to be transparent. And yeah,
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just stop there.
Yes,
just to start.
yes. So I hope that's set the basic foundation of the discussion. So I'm going to move to Mark as the group head of sustainability at Swire. How do you participate in this market or not? What is your feel about all of these voluntary carbon markets and renewable energy certificates? Now, obviously, with businesses such as aviation, properties, high polluting business. So how are you interacting with the carbon markets? Thank you.
Okay, so obviously with a diverse group, there's a diverse approach. So Cathay Pacific obviously purchases offsets to offset its passenger flights, which passengers can pay an additional fee through the Fly Greener program. And as the Swire group, we offset all of our group business travel through the Fly Greener program. So we participate in the voluntary carbon markets in that sense. In the wider sense of the group, we are in the process of finalizing an offsetting strategy and an offsetting policy, which essentially defines when we participate in the offsetting market, how we participate in that market, and what types of credits we are actually purchasing. So I can't go into detail on that necessarily because I haven't put it in front of the board yet, but to give some basic information, obviously as a business you need to be incredibly careful when using offsets within your decarbonisation strategy. There are significant reputational risks involved, particularly in how they are used. So we align with the science-based targets, net zero approach, and so essentially what that means is that offsetting can only be applied once you have achieved significant decarbonisation of your business, and is only used to offset either hard to abate or the residual emissions left behind. And I think the net zero standard expects around a 90% reduction in scope 1, 2 and 3, and then essentially offsetting can be used for the remaining 10%. So that's how you would get around the reputational risk around when to apply. And so essentially you would need to have a clear carbon transition action plan in place and publicly available in order to protect your reputation, but then also have a significant strategy and progress in place around short to medium-term targets, as was explained by Lydia earlier. So then, the types of credits involved. Again, the net zero standard is quite clear. It talks about carbon removal projects, so moving away from the avoidance credits that Hendrik mentioned. And so there we're looking at nature-based solutions. We're looking at co-benefit projects where we are, because we've also committed to water neutrality and zero waste to landfill. So is there possibility of investing in credits that actually help us achieve multiple goals towards our sustainability strategy, Swire Thrive? And then there's also the point of the types of credits, the certification standards, and it's been discussed at length really around the types of international standards that are available. And what is clear is as has been demonstrated on multiple articles in The Guardian, there is a reputational risk there for business in investing in the wrong types of credits. So actually, we're committed to only purchasing credits going forward that meet those international standards.
Thank you, Mark. So earlier we talked about, the voluntary carbon market, and there are a number of standards out there. There's also malpractice, and recently, we've heard about certain carbon credits out there is actually fraud. So, with a lot of standards out there, it's actually very confusing for buyers. Now, I understand in Asia, we are starting a new standard. So globally, we have gold standard, we have Vera standard, and I know that Raymond represents Asia Carbon Institute, and so they softly launched the institute last December. And could you just tell us more? Given that gold and Vera have been around for so many years, why creating this new standard for Asia? Please, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Raymond. We just recently established the NGO called the Asia Carbon Institute, ACI. We got the registration 2 months before and got the bank account open recently. It took a long time. It's so difficult. Anyway, the purpose of ACI actually is to set an international standard. We aim at international quality as the other peers standard like Vera or gold standard. But our purpose is to establish 2 offices in Hong Kong and Singapore so that we are close to the manufacturing sectors, which is one of the main carbon emission sources. We always believe that if we can help this manufacturing sector to decarbonize, this is better than just letting them to offset their emissions from other nature-based solutions far away from their operating base. So our standard, the purpose is to put focus on those we call it urban-based or the technological solutions. So we will encourage channeling the finance towards those advanced technological solutions so that without this kind of financial support from the voluntary market, this kind of technological solution will be hardly implemented in this part of the world. So as you have heard from the VCMI Lydia just before, that the purpose of voluntary market, actually, don't forget, it is to channel or to divert the private finance and investment to help achieving the Paris Agreement. The clue of the crux of the problem is how we ensure additionality of those solutions. And so in our standard, we always put high emphasis on those additionality of the technological solution, how the baseline is set, and how to calculate the carbon reduction. And these kind of things are very important. We will not give any banding towards the quality of this kind of criteria. So up to here, I may be able to share with you all the other things and questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik. You want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on to that, and I think it's a really important point because I only started talking about avoidance credits from renewables. What Raymond was just referring to is avoidance credits from technology solutions and the additionality piece being there. If I just step back from the IETA perspective, so the International Emissions Trading Association that I'm also part of, and what we advocate there is both removal and avoidance credits are absolutely essential for the world to get to a trajectory that we can all live with from a climate change perspective. We need all solutions to help us mitigate our carbon footprint. And if we can focus here in Hong Kong, I think this is really interesting, bringing this local, bringing this home with a standard that follows global standards but is based here and helps us identify projects that are avoiding emissions, and that could be energy efficiency in buildings projects. This could be electrification of transport. These projects need to be accelerated. And that's what this financial instrument can help us do. We can deploy more of these projects faster with a financial instrument. And the credits is just one idea of how to make this happen.
Thank you, Hendrik, for the supplement. Raymond.
Let me put a very simple example to supplement or reinforce the idea of how to channel the finance to speed up the adoption of technological solutions. Say, for example, we all know the MEEL, Mandatory Energy Efficiency Labeling, for the residential or commercial sector, just like using the grade 1 air conditioners, okay? But I tell you, even I buy my air conditioners, grade 1 is not always the #1 criteria to select. Reason? A lot of different kinds of reasons. But think about it, if we can channel the finance and help people to buy always the grade 1 MEEL energy label electrical appliances, we immediately achieve a lot of those reduction. And this is additional. Because at the for the general public, usually they will buy grade 3 or above, but never grade 1. So the delta of everybody buy grade 1 compare against the average grade 3, the carbon reduction is very significant. And this is actually the additional, because this is again, is above the general practices. And this is the concept of additionality. So we can actually create a carbon credit for this kind of, encouraging this kind of practices. So let us, from now on, encourage everybody to use the grade 1 energy label.
Thank you, Raymond. So it's important to basically to get the buffer, right, above the baseline, and then you can use that carbon credit to really finance your retrofit or decarbonization projects. Great. So I would go to our lady over there who's been sitting patiently. So Lucita, I know you at Bloomberg. You have set up a carbon network. Can you tell us more about it? And given that the market is so nascent here, why have you created that network? Thank you.
Absolutely. So I guess just to echo a few points that Raymond just mentioned, it's very important to make sure that there are financial players going to this market, because ultimately, to Jinbai's point earlier as well, without that liquidity, without financial institutions also participating, it's very difficult, because you have to reach that very aggressive 2-degree pathway. You definitely need some form of carbon credit in order to reach that residual emissions. And that's why we've kind of, make sure that we, with this, very, very fragmented market, we make sure we want to put all of the information, put all of that into one place where you'll be able to get news, more research, maybe ratings to your point, and standardization as well onto one single platform where all the market players are able to access that. And that's why we've created this network, very, very new. We launched it last year, whereby we have chapters set up in Hong Kong, India, and Sydney. We're doing it in Bursa, Malaysia, so KL soon in 2 weeks' time, making sure that we bring together all of these players. So with events in those places, we're able to get local chapters, but more broadly, it's a global thing, it's an APAC thing. And if there has been people who've been reaching out to us saying, hey, I'd really like to be connected to maybe a certain regulator or maybe a particular like maybe SME whereby they don't have that expertise, and that's where we can bring people together. And to that point, I think that's why it's very important for us to engage in these dialogues and to make sure we're helping corporations not only in their green financing, but also extending that to carbon credits too.
Thank you. I'm encouraging those joining us online to please submit questions because I will have time for Q&A later. Now, Dr. Zhang, thank you for being so patient here. We learned a lot from your slides, and I just wanted to say, to comment on one of your sentiments. China, as you said, has been doing this for many, many years. And I'm sure once it gets going, once they allow the institutional investors to join the market, I think it would be at least 4 times the size of Europe. So I think they're a bit slow, given that it is still a developing country, and we've had a number of the carbon leakage. So maybe you could explain a little bit to our audience what is carbon leakage, and the European tax, the carbon border adjustment tax. How does it work? Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Well, actually, carbon leakage. A lot of people, when we talk about CBM, they think it's a carbon tax. Just to increase you got extra money you have to pay when you want to export your products into Europe, but actually it's not. Personally, because in the compliance market in EU ETS, the carbon price, the EU allowances, the price is extremely high. So a lot of industries, a lot of corporates, they just moved their factories outside. For example, at the beginning in China, or maybe in Southeast Asia or other places where they can control the cost. And then the products will be exported back to Europe, and they don't need to bury the very high EU allowances price. So that's how it works. So which means with the CBM, no matter if you're a European company, no matter you just produce the product in Europe or in other countries, you need to be equally treated. No matter as long as you produce the same product. So you have to, for example, bear the EU allowances price or other CBM prices, and it's the same thing. And also, I just want to mention that on the way back here this morning, I just discussed with my colleagues about because I saw the topic is about internal carbon pricing, and I just realized actually I did a lot of ICP. Back then, before joining Towngas, actually I worked in NG, and I think that's in 2016 or 2018, because at that time we invested a lot in China. At the beginning, it's a gas-related projects, and then transferred to the renewable energy projects. I just want to mention that at that time I didn't know there's a wording like ICP. I just know that in the financial model we have to calculate, for example, how much CO2 emission this product will bring, and what's the price of carbon at that time. And for example, the service life of the product will be 10 or 15 years, and we have to estimate the price fluctuation in the next 10 or 15 years, and put that price as a cost in our financial model in order to increase the hurdle rate of the product. So that's why it's getting harder and harder to get not so clean products investment here in China. So we shift slowly towards renewable energy. So that's how I figured out, okay, that's ICP. At the beginning, I didn't hear a lot about ICP, but actually that was already in several corporates several years ago. Yeah, just want to share about it.
Thank you. So just as an idea, so if I created a manufactured product in Hong Kong, and I would buy renewable energy certificates so that it is zero carbon electricity produced product. So that eliminated my scope 2. And for scope 1 and for scope 3, I buy carbon credits of ACI standard or any other standard. Then I don't have to pay the adjustment carbon border adjustment tax. Is that correct?
Well,
if I were to ship this product to Europe?
Not exactly. For your scope 1, I think it's, we cannot just buy carbon credit to offset it. For example, in our business, we have a lot of, for example, waste treatment or gas or other type of entity. The first thing first is that you have to bring your physical investment, like the energy conservation installation, and for example, other physical investment. You have to try so hard and try to reduce your carbon emission, and you put all the efforts. And in the end, if for your scope 1, you're still a small portion of the emission, which is inevitable, at that time you can consider to offset this part of emission. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. So Mark, so it sounds like, you know, people agreeing with you on this policy that, you know, you have to basically eliminate as much as you can your emission reduction before thinking about buying carbon credits. So just now, Dr. Zhang mentioned internal carbon pricing. Now, I know Swire has introduced that earlier this year. Could you share with us what exactly is internal carbon pricing and how it's working at the moment?
Sure, yeah, so we are currently piloting the implementation of internal carbon pricing with 3 of our businesses, which collectively account for over 90% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So we've implemented a carbon pricing model with Swire Properties, Swire Coca-Cola, and HEYCO. The way that the internal carbon pricing mechanism works is, it pretty much says what it does on the tin, really, in the sense that it's essentially a price applied to carbon emissions, whether real or notional price. And it plays the role of an external carbon price that other sectors may have or is being brought in particular regions. But essentially, the way that we use it is to firstly identify potential future risks and opportunities associated with the carbon levels within the business, to drive additional decarbonisation within the business, and to direct capital investment within the business. So essentially, we've implemented a hybrid model, made up of 2 components. So the first component is a carbon fee, or for want of a better word, an internal carbon tax. So that's real money that is generated within the business. So essentially, in Swire Properties' case, on January the 1st, they would look at what their carbon emissions were for the previous year, and then times that by the carbon fee, the carbon tax, and that would be an additional sum of money available on top of their already existing CapEx budget associated with decarbonising their business. And that money has to be spent on decarbonisation. So the idea being that that is driving additional decarbonisation efforts within that business. So the money is generated within the operating company, stays within the operating company. The other aspect is a shadow carbon price, and that is a notional amount, which is essentially applied to all future CapEx and investment projects that exceed a particular investment threshold. And as Jinbai was just saying, that the idea being is that it impacts on the hurdle rate. So whereas previously, when a business was submitting an investment project to our investment committee, they would just present the EBIT or the IRR projections for that business. Now they have to do that plus the carbon fee. So the idea being that, let's say, for example, you're Swire Coca-Cola and you're looking at investing in a new fleet of delivery vehicles. If you just purely look at the EBIT, then actually a diesel vehicle would probably be the most cost-effective mechanism. But obviously that's not helping us with our decarbonisation. But if you apply the shadow carbon price, then suddenly that impacts on the hurdle rate of the diesel vehicle, but also lowers the hurdle rate for the low carbon option and then makes it a more viable financial investment. So that's basically the model that we're implementing. It's a bit early to say how effective it's being, but what I can say is that particularly within the sustainability functions within our operating companies, it's gained a great amount of support because obviously it's another tool, and that's essentially what it is. It's a tool to help them to decarbonize their business. Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like, each company should really think about having, their departments have their own carbon budget, really. And in all business proposals and extensions, expansion, should factor in also the carbon budget.
Just to quickly add as well, I mean, the minister from the government this morning talked about ISSB, and if you look at the stock exchange's guidance that's been released, they talk about that businesses should discuss any internal carbon pricing mechanism that they have in place. So that's a rather subtle signal that there is an expectation that businesses will be implementing an internal carbon price. And one of the side effects, particularly of the shadow carbon price, is that it helps produce the data that you will need in order to respond to TCFD and ISSB as well as us. So yeah, it has multiple benefits. Right, so carbon price, carbon tax. I mean, how does one really understand how you price a carbon credit? And then we have a compliance market which has obviously carbon allowances. So Dr. Zhang, how do you see the future of the compliance carbon market and the voluntary carbon market working together? Would it help setting the price of carbon?
Well, if you see the current price of the Chinese allowances, I don't think that's the price is determined by the market. And in the future, I do hope, because yesterday I discussed with some colleagues in Beijing, and they said, okay, because they had a seminar to discuss which kind of industries will be included, and for example, which types, which sectors, etc., etc. So I think the progress is even slow, but moving forward. So in the end, I think the allowances, the price will be, I think, will be the same, no matter it's the thermal power plants or it's petrochemical or chemical. The most important thing is that we need more participants to be part of the game. No matter it's the investors, no matter it's the compliance entities or other entities. And the current policy that in the voluntary market, for example, CCER, if you are a compliant entity and you can use CCER to replace 5% of your allowances. And I think depends on the supply and demand of the future CCER rule. For example, now we are discussing, for example, the utility scale PV or wind, or rooftop PV or wind, or methane utilization products, which kind of products can be qualified in the CCER scheme. So in the end, once we know that, we will know the current or the future supply-demand situation, and then the price will be there. But theoretically, I think because the PV or wind products in China, the size is significant, so we cannot just break the balance of the market. But the price of CCER will be definitely lower than the allowances, especially for the compliant entity. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Now,
sorry, Grace, on that, do you mind if I very quickly jump in? So I think across APAC, right, it's just from a lot of the corporations we have discussion with, isn't it moving more towards a compliance offset market, to your point, in terms of convergence a little bit? Like we see it in Australia with the CR, and also in Taiwan when they're launching it, they're also considering carbon fee and then also allowing voluntary market. So they could coexist, compliance offset market.
I'm sure they can coexist, but it's very confusing because the compliance market, okay, you have the government or agencies of the jurisdictions that set it up, right? So it's kind of regulated. When you move to the voluntary carbon markets, we have to rely on standards. We have to rely on own due diligence. We have to rely on third-party certifications. That doesn't give a lot of comfort to the buyers. Now, Raymond, how are you going to address, I mean, if people with a project coming to you and say, I want to register this project in China with your institute, what happens if you later on find that there's malpractice or there's fraud?
We won't let this happen. In the processing of the application, we will put very high emphasis on three things. One is additionality, second is the baseline, and third is the calculation of the reduction. Additionality, we will refer to the trade practice, referencing other standard organizations' criteria before we formulate our own criteria. Basically, we are now drafting our standard, and the first draft is ready by the end of this month or early next month, and this will put out to our advisor for a discussion and endorsement. I can talk a little bit about the criteria. Basically, we will use three-pronged approach to establish the additionality. Number one is it must be beyond compliance. That means anything required by the legislation will not be qualified for voluntary carbon market, carbon credit. The second one is not a common practice. This is a very, very difficult criteria, but we will try to benchmark the practice of the industry or the field that the technology is being applied and try to see whether this has already been a common practice. Just like Hendrik just mentioned, nowadays the renewables, PV, they are commonly practiced, and this one will not satisfy the common practice approach. And the third criteria, the third prong is the barriers. This is very commonly adopted, three kinds of barriers. One is financial barrier. So the technology should not be the most attractive project financially. The second one is the technological barrier. This is from the technical point of view, and we have a lot of technical experts in Hong Kong and in the region, so we can assess the technological barrier. The third one is institutional barrier, and this is talking about the various difficulty when implementing the technology. So this three-pronged barrier, three-pronged approach to the additionality will safeguard the approval of the project in terms of additionality. Of course, this three-pronged approach is sometimes very difficult, so we also will add in another one is the benchmark approach. I will not talk about detail about the benchmark approach, which is quite complicated. But anyway, this is another way to prove the additionality. Or I can simply talk about the example that I discussed with you earlier is the encouraging people to use all grade one. This is a kind of benchmark approach, okay? So in our system, we will put heavy emphasis on additionality. And then the baseline is absolutely necessary and need a lot of discussion with the project owner. So I stop here, so it's okay, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Zhang?
Actually, I forgot to mention one thing that, the price of CCR or the CEA actually is also related to the green power, the green certificates. Yeah, for example, in China, for now, if you are a utility scale renewable product, you can either allocate, or you can sell green certificates, or you can actually issue CCR. And the current price of CCR in China is more likely like 40 or 50 CNY. So probably that's a price. And if you convert this price to the kilowatt hour, that's basically 0.04 or 0.05, which is exactly the price of the green certificates. So in the end, the Chinese government realized the issue that the connection between the carbon market and the green power market is they must be connected. So if, for example, if you have a PV or wind farm, you can choose either you want to issue CCR or if you want to sell the green certificates, and the price should be similar. It's not like you can sell CCR with a very high price and the green certificates with a very low. That's theoretically that's not possible. But once again, the environmental right can only be sold once. So that's my point.
Thank you so much. We probably will end the discussion here. We'll allow some questions from the floor here. I've already received a few online, so thank you very much for submitting the questions. The first one is, if carbon credit is the last resource after own emission reduction, why should company buy the carbon credit now if there's still a lot of room for decarbonization?
Price. Now the carbon price is relatively low, and it's only going to go up. So you're essentially hedging future increases in pricing.
Well, I agree with you. So it's the price, but then, yeah.
Maybe I can just put some additional color to this. And I think we need to be careful here that carbon credits, and I think that's a very good question, are not the only way to decarbonize your portfolio. And I applaud Swire and internal carbon pricing, which is essentially sort of a private market, so to speak, to incentivize decarbonization for the group. For us at CLP, it's much more simple, and it's very much related to the type of business we have. Our Scope 1 emissions is what we need to focus on. If we get our Scope 1 emissions to zero, everyone else's Scope 2 emissions will also get to zero. So the priority for us is to invest in Scope 1 and not to invest in credits that are essentially allocating capital to something that's not directly as part of our business. We need to focus on our Scope 1. So it's a different mindset in terms of our climate vision strategy is about decarbonization of our portfolio. Once we get to that, and once we have achieved that, we can talk about offsetting everything else in our value chain. And whether that still makes sense at that point, because hopefully by then, everyone else will also get to zero.
Yeah, I mean, just to build off that, I mean, kind of applies to all businesses, although obviously the scope is slightly different. So for us, 95% of our emissions as a group is in our Scope 3, and the majority of that is in our investments in Cathay Pacific and other businesses. And so actually, the point that I made earlier about that you should only be applying offsets to the residual and hard to abate emissions applies to all business. So reduce your Scope 1 and Scope 2 first, then look at your supply chain, your value chain emissions and what you can do to reduce those as much as you can, and then apply offsetting or carbon removal credits to actually look at sorting out the remaining residual emissions.
And it is net zero targets that we're looking at. So yes, it's a good question. Why buy credits now? Well, in 2040 or 2050, when you do have to meet your net zero commitment, credits are projected by BNEF at the moment to be somewhere up of $230 a ton. It is an astonishing amount of money. If you can bank it now, maybe that's a good investment, but it is a financial instrument, so buyer beware, right?
It is a financial instrument, but it's not really at this moment in this market supported by futures and options. Something that I am sure our regulators would like to see the development there. Can I just also ask a question here? Maybe this is also for Bloomberg and Mark. Do you see increased adoption in digital tools for emission measurements? And what are the current trends and challenges preventing adoption? Like, a SaaS platform.
So we use a slight advertisement call for one of the core sponsors here, but we use the Schneider Electric Resource Advisor platform to measure all of our emissions, and that's done across the group. So all of the group's emissions are captured and reported via that tool. Some of our businesses have linked smart metering directly into that platform. But there are numerous other tools out there that enable business to accurately measure and account for their emissions. So there's no real excuse for businesses not knowing what their carbon footprint is.
I think it's rather that this market, in terms of transaction, it's very, very much opaque. But then in terms of registering, let's say, retirements, relatively transparent. You just need to go to the registry websites, Vera, Gold Standard, what have you, and you actually be able to track their documents. So what we've seen actually growing is there's blockchain technology in order to track all of this. And as a result, because there are existing, forward swaps, futures, options that is existing in the market, low liquidity right now, but growing. That's why we've actually seen there are different organizations packaging them into carbon funds. And so there is definitely a market out there.
Thank you.
Just to quickly add to my last answer. So at the moment, the internal carbon pricing that we've applied has been applied to our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, because that is something that we know and we track and we are sure is accurate and is regularly audited. The plan is to expand that to Scope 3 over time. The reason why we haven't done it for Scope 3 at the moment is whilst we have measured our Scope 3 across the group, it still heavily relies on proxy data. And so measuring the reduction of our Scope 3, which is obviously the aim of the internal carbon price, is to drive that decarbonisation. If you can't measure the reduction that's actually taking place, then it kind of invalidates the use of the ICP.
Thank you, Mark. I've got to take questions from the floor now. Please, does anyone have any question? Oh, it's my old colleague, David.
Hello, Grace. Good to see you again. It's been a few years. I have a question. I'm David Chan. I'm a solar. We're basically one of the guys that supply the PV for CLP, for Hendrik. So thank you for having the FIT scheme. That's basically a big part of our business. My question is mainly for Grace, I think, and also for Mr. Zhang, is that we talk about all these products, all those things. I mean, Grace and I, we're familiar with the stock market. That's very simple. You go in, you have all these products, you see the price, you like it, you buy it. You can buy futures, you can buy all these other instruments that, why can't the carbon market actually become something like that? I know we have these renew certificates, there's credit, there's all these different instruments, and there's also the internal market as well. But I would have thought, wouldn't it be better to have some sort of platform that people can trade, they can do things with it, they can actually buy products and trade it as a futures. So wouldn't that be something that every one of us here be working on? That we can all invest, individuals can invest, not only big companies. It's just a question to Mr. Zhang or perhaps to other members. Thank you.
Who would like to take this question? I mean, obviously, Hong Kong, our ex-company has a Core Climate, which is a carbon marketplace, and Singapore has Climate Impact X. And in a number of exchanges, such as Indonesia, Korea, what else? Quite a few that are already building their own carbon platforms, including Japan. So that's why we need Bloomberg. But, so yes, who can take that question from David?
I think we need to stay at a very basic level of why these products exist. So the whole trading, the whole component of making these financial instruments and then repackaging them and derivatives and all sorts of complex things I have, I don't profess to understand fully, but they are, out there. We have to get to the core. We are financing carbon reduction projects. That's what needs to be the focus. And some of it should be tradable, sure, but how much we need to complicate the trade for someone else to make a buck out of it, I think that's missing the point.
I do agree. I mean, we shouldn't make the carbon credit more expensive than what it really should be with all the kind of the third parties' involvement. But Dr. Zhang, you may have a different view.
Well, actually, you remind me that, for example, I think 2 years ago when we did due diligence for large-scale products, PV products, and at the beginning we thought it's a very pure, clean product, so we want to use that to do something. And suddenly, when we checked, when we did the legal due diligence, we found out that they issued IRAC, and then 2 days after that, we found out they issued CCR. And also there are some other new products that I never heard of that. So I think that's the moment when we realize that it's chaotic, so the market. So I think that's also the reason why CCER is stopped at that time, because there are a lot of different products, different areas, different methodologies. So it's not they are not good. They are indeed good product. They are indeed emission reduction products. It's just we need pure or unique methodologies to define, for example, from the forest, that's nature-based solutions, that's what kind of products, and maybe from the renewables, you can have the green certificates or other, the CCER or other gold standard or VCM, whatever. So it's like, we don't care there are how many different products. It's just, you need to make sure that this product suits your requirements, and we need to make sure that the product who issue this kind of product is pure and clean. So that's, I think that's the main point.
It is about integrity. It is about being transparent. And it is about being open. And there's one project that's underway and that is being launched currently by the World Bank together with IETA, which is the Climate Data Action Trust. It is a project that brings all the registries' credits onto one single platform where you can check what this project does and what it doesn't do. Yeah. So that, if it's repackaged, and this is the problem with these financial instruments, it gets very opaque. It just becomes then a tradable dollar product, but you don't really know what's behind that. And we all know how that ended up, 15 years ago with mortgages? You don't even know what they're buying or selling anymore, right? So this needs to be avoided.
Okay, one more question, because I know you're dying for a break, so just one more question, please, from the floor. Anyone? Okay, otherwise I've got one more from online. I think it's a good question. Is there clear guidance on whether carbon credits are considered financial instruments or commodities in the Hong Kong jurisdiction?
Not in Hong Kong, I do not believe right now. I know that our regulators are making an effort to, understand what other markets are doing. But right now in Hong Kong, it isn't. But in other, let's say in US, because it's traded on CME, because it's traded on ICE, that's why CFETS is looking at it very closely, and it is considered as a commodity. In fact, a lot of the European and America, it's their FICC desks, or they have a carbon desk, standalone carbon desk that's trading these products right now. And I guess just to reply a little bit to that previous question as well, I think it is a great thing that is moving towards more standardization, to Hendrik's point, and that's why we need the liquidity there in order to help this entire market to grow.
Well, thank you so much. I think we've got enough time, so please give a round of applause to our distinguished speakers here. And thank you so much for those joining online. We are, I think, going off on a break now. Thank you.